Hi, I'm Em.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Hello, Bea.
Hello, Em. How are you this fine day?
I am very good. I'm excited. I know I say this every time, but I am excited about talking about Merlin and Arthur today. They're fun.
This might be our least, and I say this with quotation marks, controversial ship that we have talked about thus far.
True. There's no, social stigma, really, when it comes to shipping these two characters when considering canon.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot. Well, actually, Spurk. We've done a Spurk episode, and I don't think that there's any social stigma involved with that, unless you don't like having sex with aliens.
I don't know. Most people in the fandom, I think, just sort of accept that, yeah, okay, you ship that, and that's actually pretty standard.
Spurk has become standard, which is nice. I like that. But Merthur, it's also pretty standard.
Yeah.
It's not really on another hand. It's on the same hand. Both of them are on the same hand. The other hand is Lady Noir and Steric. So, this is the next installment of our February ship series. Welcome back, everybody. We are still doing Fic Club. You have a couple more weeks to read and send in questions and all of that jazz. If you don't know, we're doing War Children by Nonymos. We have the link in the show notes. What's the ship name, Bea?
The ship name is Merthur, and that stands for Merlin Arthur, and it's portmanteau, so they smash the words together.
There aren't any others, right?
Other portmanteaus?
Other ship names. There are plenty of other portmanteaus, but are there any other ship names between Merlin and Arthur? I don't think so.
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
If I would actually love to hear if anybody has some alternate ship names, because I'm pretty sure you could work something with, Magic or Warlock or Pendragon or something.
Yeah,
I'm
Pendragon
sure that
is what I was
somebody's done
thinking.
something.
Yeah, please send in anything to us at mandbepresents@gmail.com. That's also in the show notes. We like hearing people's opinions about things. So, Merthur, I don't think anybody was shipping Merlin and Arthur before the BB show. I don't think anybody was shipping Merlin and Arthur before the show Merlin from BBC came out in 2008, right? I don't think that was a thing.
Unless there was some other franchise that decided to age down Merlin by a significant amount. Merlin was at least a solid generation, if not two, depending on the legends you read, older than Arthur, so it would have been weird, to say the least, because he would have been old.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but there's something inherently very weird trying to imagine the character from, say, Disney's Sword in the Stone Merlin and their Sword in the Stone Arthur. It just is bad. It's a don't.
That ship is on the other hand. Oh boy. Yeah, no, that's not good to me at all. I don't like that. It squicks me out. So, the show, Merlin, I actually watched the first airing of it in the United States in 2009, but it actually came out September 20th, 2008 in the UK and a couple other countries. And it ran for 5 seasons. And the cultural impact it had on fandom was massive. At the time, giant. Sadly, I was not in fandom at the time. But, history-wise, really big in fandom. Can you give us some interesting fun facts about what it was like? Or, I know you weren't involved, but...
So, from what I can gather, Merlin came at this really interesting time where fandom had sort of centralized. So instead of having these individual specific archives that people would put up, say, for the X-Files fandom, they were really centralizing back. And in this case, they were centralizing to LiveJournal. So a lot of Merlin fans, kind of like a lot of early Supernatural fans, found really big communities on LiveJournal. It was coexisting with AO3, which was also getting on its feet right around then. It's really interesting looking back at the Merlin fandom because so much of the fan base was on LiveJournal, and then when LiveJournal kind of died, I guess for lack of better term, a lot of it got imported or changed over to just straight AO3 or onto Tumblr. But there's actually a fair amount of the early stuff that never really made it, which is a bit tragic because you can look up lists for some of the early Big Bangs, and they're these massive works, completed, really nicely done, and they're either still on LiveJournal, sometimes exclusively so, or they're gone. I don't. It's a little bit sad to me because I'm like, aw, people put a lot of work, and the Merlin fandom is still going as far as we can tell. It is lovingly nicknamed the Immortal Fandom. It will never die.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's sad to see some of that early history sort of slowly drifting away.
It is sad. I don't know how AO3 would get that back to put on their servers, but
They don't. LiveJournal is particularly inhospitable to
yeah.
doing mass imports, like you could do with some of the older independent archives, because
Yeah.
it's its own platform. So any importation of fics has to be done by the authors or people the authors authorize, pun intended, I guess, to do so, which means that unless you have some really hardcore Merlin archivists out there, it ain't happening.
Sad. But the earliest Merlin fic on AO3 was posted on November 19th, 2008, which is a mere 2 months, a little bit less than 2 months after the first episode premiered in the UK. Love that industry. I just also want to say that it's called Friends by Baron. It's I adore that title. I haven't read it, so don't go reading it and thinking why did M tell me to go read. No, don't go read it if you don't want to. But like it's just titled Friends. I love it so much. It's so ficky. Anyway, so what is the show Merlin to you, B?
So the show Merlin is, as the name might suggest, a retelling of the Arthurian legends, in which they have significantly aged down Merlin so that he is roughly contemporary to the age Arthur is, which at the start of the show, he's not the king, he's just the prince. And I don't know. I don't know if it's ever canonically said, but he's in his early 20s, 21-ish. So both young men.
They're both young men, and the show is basically like a Monster of the Week show. Especially at the very beginning. Like every week there's a new thing that Merlin has to deal with, kind of a show. So there let's just list some main characters, okay? So there's Merlin, obviously. There's Arthur, obviously. There's Gaius, who is the
Royal physician.
He's the royal physician. He's also the mentor to Merlin as like he kind of becomes he's like Uncle Gaius essentially. And he kind of takes the place of Merlin like
from the original Arthurian legends.
Yes, generationally he does. Yeah. And then there's Guinevere, who in this retelling is the maid servant. Is that what they were called? Maid servant or lady servant? She's the servant,
lady's
the assistant.
maid.
Lady's maid, there we go. She was lady's maid of Morgana, who is the ward of King Uther, who is the father of Prince Arthur. And that essentially makes Arthur and Morgana kind of like stepbrother, stepsister a little bit, but they're not related to each other, kinda. And then there is a whole cast of adorable young men who are the Knights of the Round Table. And that's essentially all of the people you really need to know. Guinevere has a brother, there are specific knights that you really end up liking, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So the premise of the show is not an exact retelling of the original stories, obviously, but it is a dramatic BBC show where Merlin and Arthur are the same age, and magic is outlawed in Camelot because Uther, Arthur's father, criminalized magic after his wife died, giving birth to Arthur, and the only reason why Arthur is alive is because of magic. So that's why he, criminalized it because he's a terrible person and everybody hates Uther, including Arthur.
Uther is the kind of father who would agree with the king in Sleeping Beauty, where they just burned all the spindles. Like,
Yep.
We'll just import all of our thread now. This is a great economic choice. They're on the same wavelength.
Yep, they really are. Everybody hates Uther. And then there's Merlin, who comes to Camelot ostensibly to learn about magic and life and kind of, figure out who he is from Gaius. And he is like a very powerful magic wielder, essentially. He's a wizard. He's a very powerful wizard. And it's innate. All the people who use magic essentially have to learn how to use like different spells and different words and all that stuff. But his is just like, he just decides to do it with his head and then it happens. He doesn't have to do anything to make it happen. And his eyes do a little fun glowy thing. So Merlin accidentally becomes Arthur's manservant in the very first episode. That's how the show makes sure that they're together in every episode.
Mm-hmm.
So they have intense magical adventures, and Arthur can't know that Merlin has magic because it's outlawed and he would have died. And at the very beginning of the show, they show a woman who was accused of witchcraft dying in a fire. And I need everybody to recognize this show is it's pretty corny. It's pretty goofy. What I just said sounds not goofy. And there are definitely instances in the show in which there are like, it is rough, man. Especially the ending. It's rough. But there are just moments in the show that are like, was this written by an 8-year-old? Like
Yeah, there are episodes in which the king is enchanted to marry a troll.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that one. Oh my god.
There's an episode where Arthur gets donkey ears.
Yep.
Like there's goofy episodes.
It's goofy.
In the backdrop of this sort of main tension where Merlin is always risking his life by just being who he is, and the person who he serves and who eventually he becomes friends with can never really know
who he is. Yes. Which is a good segue into the concept of having magic in this show is absolutely an allegory for like being different. And a lot of people consider it as like being part of the LGBTQIP spectrum. So a lot of fic surrounds the concept of that, and it's fun. It's fun to read, but it's an easy way to talk about those kinds of things with the word magic in the show, kind of. That tension between Merlin not being able to tell Arthur about who he really is, and therefore also having to save Arthur from all of these magical adventures that they're in, really easily turned into like a really big ship. And even after the show ended, the shipping and the fic writing has continued, and yes, it is called the Immortal fandom, which is I really love that because it's a really good ship. It's really fun to read. It's really fun to just be involved in, and the fan art can be really good, man. Just go on Tumblr and look up Merthur fan art. It's fun. So, B, give us a lowdown on who Merlin is, kind of, as a character.
Yeah. The salient plot points are still he is young, he's Arthur's servant, and he has forbidden magic. But I guess it's also important to note that he ends up playing foil in a lot of ways to Arthur, so he is described as fairly clumsy. Whether or not this is true is up for some debate, considering the amount of dangerous situations he manages to get out of. He's very gentle, where Arthur tends to be kind of strict or by the book.
He's more brusque.
Yeah, Merlin is the more compassionate half in most situations.
True.
At least in the beginning, which is a really interesting little character point.
Yeah, Arthur becomes more empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
He is very, very secretive and becomes more so as the series progresses, even though he's meant to appear kind of open and maybe sometimes very foolish with sparks of wisdom. Whereas Arthur is very, like, I guess, tradition bound in the beginning, and he learns to open up and kind of trust Merlin with everything. And Arthur, you can see him slowly going from being kind of a self-centered, pompous moron to learning and growing to be a good leader. So he sort of is slowly attaining wisdom, whereas Merlin has to hide what he's learned.
He's also called Emrys.
Oh, yeah. It's important to note that he's called Emrys, which can sometimes be used interchangeably in fic, or
True.
a lot of times it's used as a last name for him because he doesn't actually have a last name in the show,
I know he
which
doesn't.
is actually kind of fun because I think the medieval convention in a lot of stories is either to go by lineage or go by place of origin. So, Merlin's son of Hunith, his
Yeldor.
mother,
Or
or yeah,
yeah,
Merlin
Merlin
of
Yeldor.
Yeldor, which is where he came from, but they don't do any of that. He's just Merlin, full stop. He straight on Beyonce is his name.
No, no,
Everybody
no.
knows who he is.
He's Merlin.
Yeah.
In a time of in a land of myth and a time of magic.
Yeah.
So Emrys is kind of if you know that name, then you're in the know because that's his fancy magic name, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
That's his prophesied name. Yeah, druids call him this in the show, and also doesn't the dragon underneath the castle also call him that?
He calls him Young Warlock. I'm not actually sure
Yeah, you're
what
right. He
other
does.
names he calls him, if
What's
anything. He just
is his
skips the
name?
entire issue.
His name is Kilgara, right?
Yeah, Kilgara, yeah. I think in the very beginning of the series he calls him Emrys because that's how both Merlin and the audience are introduced to the name, but thereafter I'm not sure what he calls him. Actually leads to some really fun identity shenanigans where
Yeah.
people know Emrys is out there and exists, but don't know it's Merlin. And there are people who know Merlin is Emrys, and then Merlin eventually ends up kind of creating this other persona of an old man. So there are people who think that the old man is Emrys, but don't think that he's Merlin. So
So fun.
it's actually really funny because, like, it becomes almost a passphrase. Like, okay, you know the first level, you know who Emrys is. And then you get to the point where you're like, well, then you know Emrys is an old man, and then you know that the old man is Merlin.
That's when you know everything. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The dragon, Kilgara, who is the last dragon, by the way, in the show, like just in the world of the show.
Uther apparently wasted a lot of time in soldiers killing all of the other dragons.
Yeah, because Uther sucks and everybody hates him. The dragon he's the last dragon. He is jailed underneath the castle, and he tells Merlin, the first episode, he tells Merlin essentially that you and Arthur are two sides of the same coin, which I think is very romantic. We'll get into that. But basically, Merlin is supposed to make sure that Arthur doesn't die before he becomes king. Because Arthur's supposed to usher in a new age to Camelot and make sure that the world is better, I guess. And Merlin has to make sure that that happens. So in turn, Merlin makes the world better.
Yeah, and
But,
at least in the beginning, this is very much against his own inclinations. He does not care about Arthur.
Arthur and Merlin, quite obviously, and in every romantic comedy there is, hate each other's guts at the very beginning. I love it so much. Arthur is kind of an asshole at the beginning. He's not who we love at the end of the series, because Arthur's way better at the end of the series. He grows a lot. Merlin calls him a prat, which is a good description. And as the show continues, Arthur does grow, which is good, and he marries Guinevere. Arthur does marry Guinevere in the original stories, right?
Yes.
Yes.
It's
Everybody knows.
a really different situation, but yes.
True, because like we said earlier, Guinevere is a servant, like Merlin. And that's kind of fun as a shipper of Merlin and Arthur, because it means that Arthur is willing to consider a person outside of his class as somebody he's willing to love.
Yeah, there's precedent.
Exactly. There's precedent that Arthur is willing to love a servant, of which Merlin is as well. Arthur is much better than Uther, just in every way. And it's good. It's good that he's better than Uther in every way, because Uther sucks and everybody hates him. It's also kind of a cliche in the story, or in the show, that Arthur does everything in his power to make sure that everybody in Camelot is safe. He makes sure that he protects the people of Camelot. He really, I will say, even at the very beginning, Arthur is he takes him having power and being a prince seriously when it comes to the safety of his people in his kingdom.
He's a very proactive leader. He wants to get in there and fix the problems himself, whether or not this is a good idea.
I would say that Arthur is the himboiest person in the show, and of all of the ships that we have talked about, he's probably the most himbo, which is somebody who is very nice, very pretty, and a little bit dumb.
And very buff. We should mention that it's
Well,
buff pretty.
but I mean, he's very pretty. He's also just very pretty.
As opposed to a him bim, which is just pretty.
Him bim?
Yes. It's part of the dichotomy.
I didn't know. Thank you for giving me this information because I will be utilizing it in my life. But he's not that dumb. He's just comparatively to Merlin. He's a little dumb, but he also just doesn't have all the information. Like, so I get it.
Also, you have to assume at some point he's also at least a bit willfully oblivious. Like, it doesn't fit in his worldview. He's not paying attention to that. So
Yeah.
we're just going to move right along.
He's a
Because 5 seasons of magic shenanigans is a long time for him to not figure out that his very closest friend has magic.
Yeah. Yeah. If I've watched all of the seasons of Downton Abbey, I recognize that you get to know the people who work for you very well. If you live with them, essentially.
And it's worth noting that in Showtime, that is canonically 10 years. So he's known Merlin for a decade. And he doesn't figure it out.
What a himbo.
So
there's this guy who is really important that Merlin needs to make sure stays alive, who is constantly putting himself in danger for those that need help. Just constantly doing that. Including Merlin himself. He's putting himself in danger for Merlin as well. So that is hilarious, watching Merlin not only try to save his king's ass all the time, but also make sure that this king does not recognize that he is saving him. And that is the tension of the show, in my opinion. And it's really fun to watch. It's not an amazing show. It's a BBC comedy drama. It's dramedy. But, like, I think it's fun to watch, you know, just because of that. And I think that's a really funny idea. It also makes for some very good hurt comfort, which, as everybody knows, I am a whore for hurt comfort. We should talk about the end. If you're in the middle of this episode and you're listening and you haven't seen the show, go watch it. It's pretty good. If you care about spoilers, stop listening right now. Okay? Because we're going to be talking about some massive spoilers.
Yeah, you can come back in a few minutes when we just talk about the ship again. But
Yeah. The ending of the show literally murdered me. No, it didn't literally murder me, but it figuratively, emotionally murdered me. Did you watch it, Bea?
Yes, but not in terms of the whole show. I didn't watch it in order. I haven't watched all of the episodes of the last season. So I watched it, but it was rough. Like, I'm gonna kind of cherry pick my way through this last season and then watch the finale, which, to be completely honest, I am a huge Arthurian Legends nerd, so I already knew the ending going in. I knew what was going to happen.
I did not know the ending going in. I did exactly the same thing as you. I watched through season 4, and then in season 5, I cherry-picked the episodes I actually wanted to watch because I had the ability from Netflix to do that. And then I watched the final 2 episodes, and so, okay, Arthur dies, and ever since the beginning, Kilgara the dragon was saying Arthur is the once and future king. So keep that in mind as we talk about this. But essentially, Arthur gets, like, hit in the back with an arrow, and Merlin has to take Arthur to the Lady of the lake in which the lady lives in. I can't remember why, though, for some reason.
So,
give me the deets, Bea.
So, I'm going to default a little bit to you in terms of what they did in the show. In the original story, what happened is, how would they have phrased it? Mordred and he smote each other a mighty blow.
Yeah.
So he basically stabbed Mordred, and Mordred clobbered him over the head. However they did it in the show, Mordred dies, but Arthur is mortally wounded.
Yeah.
And so Merlin has very limited ability to heal. That is his one great weakness in terms of magic. And so he's like, well, I do know of a creature who can take someone back from the brink of death because she did that for me. So I'm going to drag him off to this great sacred holy lake in which she lives and see if she can heal him.
Okay. I'm pretty sure same kind of idea was happening in the show. He
Well,
was
that
take
last part editorialized was the show. In the original,
yeah.
he just straight up dies, and Merlin actually isn't. He's a tree at that point, so he's not part of this at all.
Well, we got a lot more dramatic tension happening in the show. Instead of Merlin being a tree, he gets Arthur, like they're traveling to go to this lake, and Merlin is really trying desperately to make sure that he doesn't die. And his weakness is that he can't heal. So like he's doing everything he can, which isn't a lot. And eventually, on this trip, Merlin, quote unquote, comes out to Arthur as somebody who has magic. And it is heart-wrenching. it is so, like, Arthur grew up thinking that magic was bad. And throughout the seasons of the show, he started to become more open to the idea that magic necessarily isn't all bad.
Mm-hmm.
And when Merlin has to tell him, I'm actually a sorcerer and I have been supporting you these last 10 years and I am in love with you. No. I support you in every way and have supported you and saved your life countless of times. He at first is very shocked and at first is just like, I'm really struggling with this. And then he starts to see that Merlin is still taking care of him as a servant would a king. And he's just like, I guess you're still you. And he is still him. And Merlin cradles Arthur in front of this lake as Arthur is dying. And it is seriously one of the... it is so romantic and sad. And like, you start crying a little bit because you've been with these people for 5 years and one of them's dying. And it's a whole big thing. And Arthur dies in Merlin's arms. The thing that Merlin was trying desperately to stop for 10 years. And a fun little fact, Merlin's a dragon lord. So he's the son of the last dragon lord. So he's able to call Kilgara whenever he wants to. That's part of what it is to be a dragon lord. So he calls Kilgara and be like, what is even happening right now? I thought our destinies were intertwined and I was supposed to help him usher in a new world or whatever. And Kilgara's like, don't worry about it, man. I've always been telling you, he's the once and future king, which means he will come back. You just have to stick around long enough to see it through. And then Merlin puts Arthur on a boat and then lights him on fire and shit, and like his body is gone.
I don't think he lights him on fire. I think he disappears into the mist.
No, I thought he lit him on fire.
No, because how can he come back if his body's on fire?
No. You think he's gonna be a zombie?
I figured that he was in a magical healing lake. It was gonna make him better, and he would come back at some point.
No, I don't think so. I thought it was a reincarnation thing. It's fine. Different interpretations. I thought he did like.
I don't remember Arthur.
I thought it was a Viking-esque kind of.
It was Viking-esque, but I don't remember there being fire because
okay, maybe I'm wrong.
He was going to the Isle of Avalon.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. That isn't even the worst part of the ending, in my opinion, because the next thing you see is a shot of this beautiful tower that's in the middle of the lake, and then suddenly the tower is like crumbling, and a truck, a big truck drives past. A vehicle drives past in the middle of this, like, last episode of this like medieval show.
And I'm gonna freely admit that I had a flashback right at this exact moment from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where I was like, are we just gonna arrest everybody? Is that the end?
Well, it's very anachronistic, right? Like, it's completely outside of the time in which this story is set. And no, nobody gets arrested. But the next thing you see is Merlin walking down this road next to the lake as an old version of him. And apparently he has been living for 1,000 years at that point. Hundreds of years at least. And the last thing that you see is him just stopping, looking at the lake, sighing, and continuing to walk. That is, like, considerably, like, way more heartbreaking than I ever thought the end of this funny little show from the BBC would have ended. Who would have expected that kind of heart-wrenching ending?
I mean...
if you know anything about the Arthurian legends, then yes. But, like, that they didn't have to kill you in that way, you know? They didn't have to murder you, but they did. What do you think?
So I will freely admit that the ending, they did a really good job, but I don't think it gut punched me in the same way because I was expecting it. Again, huge Arthurian Legends nerd.
Mm.
So I knew going into the series that although they took a lot of liberties with a lot of things, if they were going to follow even the grossest form of the legends, Arthur dies at the end. And it is somewhat the point that his Camelot is unfulfilled. In the legends, there's a lot of repeated themes of it could have been, and there was a chance to. And there's almost a message of things cannot be perfect because that is not the way it was intended. It's interesting and complicated, and I would really recommend that you pick up some version, even just a kid's book version, and read through the tales because there are certain things that they hammer on that you're like, I mean, in the original version, Merlin spends a goodly amount of time and dialogue telling everybody, if you don't do these things in this way specifically, everything will go wrong, and they continue to ignore him. Very much Cassandra-ing through his life. But it is interesting to me the way they chose to end it because, as I said before, in the actual mythos, at this point, Merlin had been betrayed by a lady student who may or may not have been romantically involved with him, who traps him. And there are versions. There's a version where he's trapped in a tree or is a tree. There's a version where he's trapped in a magic cave. There's a version where he's just been sleeping. But he gets trapped so that he's no longer helpful in the story in any way. Arthur goes to his final battle on the moors of Camlan and gets mortally wounded, and it's one of his knights that takes him to the Lake of Avalon to die, and
Who
they
is
both
it?
know
Do you
it's
know who it is?
happening. So, again, everything I say, there is a different version,
Oh,
but
okay.
I believe that it is Sir Bors, who is one of... That's the version I know off the top of my head. And he takes him to the lake knowing he's going to die, but not to get completely sidetracked, but fun fact, the sword in the stone is not Excalibur. Excalibur was given to Arthur from the Lady of the Lake through Merlin on the deal that he would give it back. So they take him to the lake specifically to return Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. And he tells Bors to do it, and Bors is like, oh man, I don't know. And he doesn't. And Arthur goes, no, really do it. I know you didn't do it. And Bors is like, I feel really bad. I can't. And he doesn't. And he is like, I did it, man. And Arthur goes, you didn't do it. So Bors finally throws it in the lake, and an arm reaches up and catches it and brandishes it 3 times. And it's at this point, again, divergent stories, but usually a boat comes from the Isle of the Blessed Avalon, and sometimes it has 3 women, sometimes 7, and they come specifically to take Arthur and bear him away to a place where he will rest until he rises again, presumably with, like, Merlin, who will get free at some point. So the way that the show ended, where they skipped Merlin not being in the show for some obvious reasons, but had him still living on but not in stasis, is kind of, yeah, it is kind of a gut punch. The idea that
Ugh.
he has been waiting, but his waiting has been agonizing and long. Because as far
Yes.
as we know, Arthur is just sleeping.
Obviously, Merlin has magic, so it's a lot easier for him to continue on living, and that's the reason why he can continue on living, because he has magic. But it just, I'm sure that after 100 years, just like hundreds of years, but even after 100, it takes its toll on you, man. Just mentally, where even is Merlin in 2015? You know? Oh my gosh. You just the consequences of those decisions like really hit you full force when you really think about it. So
I would also like to put forward here the absolutely horrifying implications of Arthur not having returned by the year 2012.
what is even going to happen that Arthur has to come back for? Yeah.
Yeah, you think about it and you go, oh, 2 world wars didn't do it.
Oh.
A Holocaust didn't
A
do it.
Holocaust didn't do it?
You're like, what's coming?
What's coming?
That isn't time of greatest need yet, y'all. This is terrifying.
Oh, golly. Anyway, aside from the ethical implications of that, why do people ship them? I mean, why do people ship anybody? Why do we ship any couple at all? There's some basis of it in canon. People decided, hey, they're actually kind of cute together. They should kiss, and then a bunch of stuff happens after that. So that's kind of it. I mean, and also they just have they're foils for each other, and we have talked about how foils for each other tend to get shipped in fun ways. They're each one side of the same coin, which I think is a perfect way to describe. They're not it's not like a villain and a hero getting shipped. It's they just happen to be on opposite sides of the spectrum, and that makes them really interesting to watch and to read about.
They work really well in complement to each other because they get to play off of each other, but
Yes.
you also get to see, I guess it's because they're so different, they sometimes kind of rub against each other, and there's
Oh, they rub against each other. Sorry.
frick. Their sharp edges get caught on each other, and so you get to see really what they're made of, because they do tend to sort of, wear each other down to the point where it's who they really are
Yeah.
without pretense. It works because of that, and it works because they really do have this very close relationship in the story.
They really do. They really become friends in canon. I headcanon that in the show, Merlin actually really truly is in love with Arthur, and that Arthur is just a himbo who's already married, and he's just kind of a disaster person.
He ain't with it.
He ain't with it. It's true. Really, it really isn't. In fic, it's fun to me when Arthur already knows this about himself, that he's bi, pan, gay, that kind of. He's not straight, and also falls in love with Merlin. I think that that's fun. You don't get to see that in the canon. Not necessarily. People think that that last scene was so romantic that it couldn't have just been one-sided. God, hurt
uh,
comfort, man. So good. What are you saying?
I feel like it's worth noting here that in the spirit of, well, what else were you going for, as we see in a lot of shows, like what else could you possibly have meant? For what it's worth, when I first was introduced to this show and the concept of it, like, I looked at this and went, they made Merlin a twink. They made him a younger, sexier version. What else were they going for here? Because even
It's
if you don't
true.
ship him with Arthur, strictly speaking, with the exception of the comedy bits, there is not a whole lot of reason thematically that you couldn't have made him at least somewhat older, like Uther aged, than Arthur, because he could still be a servant, and he could still be in fear of his life, and he could
Yeah,
still
you're
be
right.
trying to change Arthur to make him better. He would have ended up as more of a mentor character, but a lot of the big broad strokes things didn't really change. So the only conceivable reason to make him young and beautiful, I suppose,
Besides
is
wanting more audience. Besides
was
money.
because you wanted a main character who is shippable, with someone. Again,
Sure.
not necessarily Arthur, but the first season of the show does kind of go out of its way to kind of set up a little mini arc where him and Gwen are kind of crushing on each other.
Yeah. Which is so weird to me because Merlin is so gay. He's just not straight. He's just not interested in women. Let's put it that way. I just don't think he is. You just
I
get those
think that he has
vibes.
a great admiration and affection for a lot of women, but yeah,
Yeah.
he doesn't strike as somebody who is like, ah, yes, I would like to marry a woman,
Oh God, that's not
um,
Merlin at
or even
all.
have a deep relationship with a woman. And which is ironic and somewhat hilarious because they do have a fairly significant plot point where he is prepared to run away with a girl who he is madly in love with. But
Yep.
even then, they were like, we're gonna go make ourselves a little house cottage on the edge of a lake, and we're gonna grow flowers, and it'll be beautiful, and we'll all be happy and free and can live as ourselves. None of which is, ah, yes, let us get married and have children. It's like, let's be lovely platonic soulmates and live
It's
forever until
true.
we're crotchety.
Oh man, yeah. I do also want to say that yes, there's this crazy death scene that happens at the end of the series, like between Arthur and Merlin. There's also another death scene earlier in the series between, spoiler alert, don't listen to the next 30 seconds or a couple minutes, between Merlin and his best friend Will from his old town. And you would think that the emotional like intensity would be at about the same, right? Because Will was his best friend for 20 years. Around then, 15 years, let's say. And Arthur was his best friend for 10 years too. Less time, but around the same. And Will's death is
Phrased completely differently.
yeah, it's just not as romantic at all. They're just best friends. They're not. Go watch the last episode if you don't care about everything else, but you just want the ship, right? Go watch the last episode. You'll see it. You'll understand what we mean. It is heart-wrenchingly romantic and sad and beautiful, the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
Will dying is not that. It is more like, this had to happen because of the story. Feels very hand of the author to me.
Em and I were joking earlier, but there's very much a feeling of like, lads, is it gay to tenderly cradle your very best friend in the entire world who you would do anything to save, including murdering entire armies, while he's dying, and then soulfully look into his eyes and cry? The answer is yes. Yes, it is gay. Like, if you've reached a point in your relationship where you're like, I will murder nations for you in your name to protect you, you've
love.
Transcended the level of platonic friendship.
That is not platonic love anymore.
Even if it is purely on a non-sexual level, Merlin loves him more than anyone else. I feel like a good way of putting it is, if you want an example of what friendship looks like, look at Cass and Sam from Supernatural. If you want something else, turn your head just a bit to the right, because Dean and Cass got something else going on. And in this case, you want to see what deep friendship looks like? Let's look at Merlin and Will. Yep. And if we would like to see what something else is, let us turn our head slightly to the left, and we've got Arthur and Merlin. That's really not the same thing. They're phrased very differently, and the level of intimacy, I guess, is different. Again, even if it's completely non-sexual, these two people are so deeply important to one another on so many levels. I mean, again, Merlin is willing to burn down the world for him, and Arthur is willing to overturn everything he ever believed in his life for Merlin, as he's dying, when it doesn't even really matter anymore for him.
The fic literally writes itself at this point, okay? This is why it's called the Immortal fandom, because of this ending, and because of these two people. Holy crap. Morgana and Guinevere are also pretty cool people too, but
the show did not do as well with their women characters, let us be honest.
Yes.
They had a couple of really great ones, and we could speak at great length about what happened to them in the plot.
I think Guinevere did a pretty okay job for herself. You know, she's queen. She's ostensibly going to lift the bans on magic and all that stuff. But
yeah, she got the short end of the stick in the emotional arc, though.
She did. Because that's true. Morgana and Morgause, on the other hand, though,
they got a really interesting ending. But for all that this character started strong, and this is purely my opinion, and for all that they ended fairly strongly, their middle was rough.
Yeah.
Emotionally, in terms of the actual character arcs for each of them, the middle part was not strongly done, in my opinion. The structure of the show is kind of interesting, because you have the first, I believe, 3 seasons, which are meant to follow very closely on each other. And then seasons 4 and 5 are after a time skip of a couple of years. So you have these very odd things that happen where like in season 3, I believe, is where Arthur has a strong arc for romancing Guinevere and getting married. And then you have this time skip, and it feels like a much more mature relationship. And you're like, but I didn't get to see any of that. And now, so you got to see the nascent relationship, and then you're like, oh, and then it's super serious. And you're like, well, I, what? I got to see Merlin and Arthur, but I didn't get to see Arthur and Guinevere at all. And Morgana has some of the same thing where it goes from this slow building, slow descent, I think is the better way of
Yeah, slow
phrasing it.
descent.
Because she starts out as this very morally strong character who is trying to help everybody and is very compassionate, and she slowly starts changing as her life gets worse. And you have this time skip, and suddenly she's kind of evil.
She
And
looks
you're like,
evil.
but I wanted to see this descent into corruption. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a bit sad because you get to see a lot of really solid arcs with the boys,
you
but
do.
not as much with the ladies.
Which helps with the shipping. The show is what it is. Now let's get into the fic a little bit. The fun fic.
Yes.
The actually amazing fic.
Yeah, Merlin fandom has amazing completed long fic.
Yeah,
So if that is something you want, please go to the Merlin
that is
fandom.
my catnip right there. I love amazing completed long fic. Love that stuff.
The only caveat being, yeah, Merthur is default for most people. So if you're looking for a really wide variety of ships, might not find quite what you're looking for. There is some variety.
There's some variety. I mean, I know that people like to polyship all the four: Morgana, Guinevere, Arthur, and Merlin. I know that that's a thing,
Mm, that
right?
was an early fandom thing,
Oh,
but
cool.
I guess hopefully final spoiler, you learn in the second or third season that Morgana is Uther's illegitimate daughter, and so a lot of the shipping between Morgana and Arthur in any flavor dried up real quick there.
Yeah, this fandom is not quite as open to that kind of stuff as say the supernatural fandom, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Let's get into the fic. Do you want to go first?
Okay. So the first fic is not terribly long. It's called Made of Dreams and Bones by Lady Ragnell. And it is an AU in which, somewhat ambiguously, sometime in either pre first season or in an alternate universe, first ish season, Uther is killed. And because of this, Arthur is ousted from the kingdom and is basically in exile. And he ends up in Eldor, which is where Merlin is from, and ends up living basically right next door to him and going from prince to pauper kind of in a flash. And it's a really sweet story in which he is basically learning to be a peasant from Hunith and Merlin and learning to survive and having a really close relationship. It's a really, really interesting take on Arthur as a character because he is basically stripped of a lot of his really defining attributes, his class, his wealth, his pride, and yet you can still see him, the character, shining through where he cares about people and he knows how to fight and he is willing to do whatever he needs to defend his home.
Merlin is 3 years younger than him in this fic.
Yes.
Yeah, I just reread
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah, it is absolutely one of my favorite fics. It has a trope that I wish I could find more of. It If it's not out there, I would be very sad. But it's Arthur gets exiled, and I don't know why, but it absolutely thrills me the idea that this one thing that he's so proud of and is so integral to his character is no longer part of his
It's
character,
so good.
and he has to rediscover himself. I don't know. I just really like the trope, and I don't feel like I see enough of it. So
It's great. That fic is so good. Like it's a fic that you read with a cup of tea in front of a rainy window. The fic that I read that you actually wrecked me, Garden or Graveyard by ShanaStoryteller, similar to how you feel about Made of Dreams and Bones. For me, it is one of those fics that I just reread and I adore it, and I want the same idea in multitudes of fics, please. It is the idea that Arthur also has magic, but the only thing he can do is heal, which is the thing that Merlin cannot do. And so they are just even more so like opposite ends of the spectrum and like two different sides of the same coin. Like it's great. There's also some really good hurt comfort. Merlin almost dies and Arthur has to save him because the only thing Arthur can do is heal, and it's just it's so good. It makes me so happy. I implore everybody who's listening to this to read both Made of Dreams and Bones and Garden of Graveyard. Garden of Graveyard is shorter. Made of Dreams and Bones is like 7K, and Garden of Graveyard is like 20, right? Or 15 even.
I have no memory one way or the other. They both are very short and
They're both
beautiful in my
shorter.
brain.
Yeah, they're great. They're beautiful fics. I love them so much, but I Garden of Graveyard is just one of those that just makes me happy.
So the next one is a longer work. It's, I want to say 46K. It's called Stars Above, Stones Below by Destina. And if you want one that is really about the shipping and is also really well written, I would 100% recommend this one. In the story, it's set later in the seasons where Arthur has. There's a plot in the later season where he thinks Guinevere has betrayed him and so he exiles her. And this is set during that time where she's gone and he's feeling very betrayed and hurt. But another character is counseling him really strongly that he should get married. So his solution to this, sort of at Merlin's prompting, is that he will handfast Merlin for a year, which will keep him from having to marry anybody because it will basically make Merlin the consort, but it will only be for a year. And it's about their relationship and them kind of already being in love and realizing it. And it ends up being a reveal fic, and it's got some lovely fallout and some really good hurt comfort in it. So if you want one that's really about the two of them and also just feels super satisfying, like the way a happier version of the series should have ended, this is definitely the one for you.
B, I think you and I need to talk about Radioman together. Because
Yeah.
I put Radioman by Footloose on this list for a reason. So it's the first of an installment of a multitude of series. And have you finished them? Because I haven't yet.
I have not finished the
Okay.
series, which, just for reference for everybody, the series is also called Radioman. That's the name of the first work and the name of the series.
What I'm wrecking right now is the first of the series, but even without me having read all of them, I have read, I think, 4 or 5, and so good. Like, it is just one of those fics that it's just top fic. Not even in the Merthur fandom, just top fic ever, I think. It is a novel. You're just reading novels at this point from this person.
Several, because each work is quite long.
Yeah, each work is like 50K at least. And this author put them out like at least 6 or 7 in 1 year. 1 year. And 60K or 55K or something like that is the length of one Harry Potter novel, the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me just get into what it's actually about. Radioman by Footloose is the first of an installment of fics where it is a modern AU, and Arthur is the head of a squadron or a group of people in the British Army.
Yeah, it's an SAS unit, which is Special Forces.
Special Forces, essentially, yes. And they keep going through these radio men, these people who allow everybody in the group to contact each other, have access to information, all that jazz. They keep having people on their team who make that happen for them that are terrible. They're just not great radio people. And Merlin ends up becoming their radio man. And obviously he's very good at what he does. And he also has magic. It's a modern AU where Merlin still has magic. And it's so good. It's...
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Each fic almost feels like a mega chapter of a bigger story because there is this huge plot that spans a lot of words, but each chapter feels really satisfying, or each fic feels really satisfying in its own way. So Radioman, if you read nothing else, could be self-contained with kind of an open ending, but as you get further in, it gets more complicated and the plot gets deeper. And you start with I don't want to say fast burn because they're definitely not together by geez, I want to say I'm on the 11th part of it or
Oh
something,
my
and
God.
they're just sort of together
Are they?
because Arthur, being the noble person that he is like, I'm his commanding officer. We can't actually be together until after our tour is up because that would be really, really bad on a number of levels
So it
to
is
get
the
involved.
slowest of slow burns.
But at the same time, it's a real fast burn because they literally, there's this beautiful parallel scene where it alternates between points of view between Merlin and Arthur. And there's a scene where Merlin has just come to base and hasn't met Arthur yet. And Arthur has just come off a mission and doesn't know who Merlin is. And they both meet in the supply tent and have this argument. And you get it from both sides. And they both look at the other and go, oh, geez, that's my type. That is the most beautiful human I've ever seen. And then proceed to argue viciously with each other and then turn around and leave and then meet each other professionally.
Ugh.
It's really funny because they both are immediately drawn to one another. Oh, and it's also important that this fic has themes of don't ask, don't tell, where
Yes. Yes, it does.
because they're in the army, they're keeping the fact that they are gay pretty dang close to their chests. And in Arthur's case, it's a little bit of an open secret. Most of the people on his team already know, but Merlin does not and continues to not for a fair while. But Merlin, nobody knows until they finally kind of
Just ask.
pry it out.
Yeah.
They pry it out of him eventually.
Yes, they do.
And so there's this beautiful, awkward moment where Arthur's like, oh, I have a chance! I cannot take this chance. I'm still his superior officer.
Oh.
And Merlin, of course, is still like, could I, can't I? Because he doesn't know if Arthur is gay. And it gets even better because I don't want to spoil things, but it's great. It has so much tropey goodness in it, and the plot is really interesting. Just, it's a lot of fun. It's a huge read, though.
You would agree with me though that it's like reading novels.
Yes.
The quality it's there.
It's a really interesting collection because on the one hand, yes, they're novel length and it feels novel length and it feels really nicely paced and well written. But on the other hand, I'm not joking when it feels like each fic is like some kind of mega chapter in a bigger book.
Yes, I completely agree. They're self-contained little stories. It's true. But the way the author paces it and has the arc worked out, it just doesn't, it feels like the biggest book you've ever read. In a really good way. In a really fun way. Yeah, Radioman's the shit. We've talked a lot about Merthur, but if you're going to experience some of the fic that we are recommending, I would say go for like the shorter ones that we talked about like at first, and then go into something like Radioman and really enjoy the hell out of it. So anyway, thank you for listening. This has been actually really fun talking about Merthur because we don't have to worry about age or like consent issues or anything like that.
It's refreshing.
So refreshing. All right, so by the way, everybody, we have a Patreon. If you want to support us and listen to more of us talking about people who we ship, go ahead and support us on Patreon. It's in the show notes. Thank you to the people who are already supporting us. We really, really appreciate it. Anyway, I think that we are done.
Yeah, I think so. So I guess we'll see y'all next week on
Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!